One of the things that Gary discovered is that setting a high, hard goal, just a very big, lofty, I want to write a book, I want to become a doctor, that kind of goal is enough to amplify motivation by 25%. So just by building a big kind of frame around the idea, which is essentially what a goal is, right? You can get a boost in motivation that's 25%. That's really neat. One of the ways Clear Goals works is when I'm working through my to-do list, say my first item is my morning writing session, I'm going to work on the book that I'm working on. And the next thing I'm going to work on is some copy for a frequently asked questions document about flow for our website. For example, if I have everything on my to-do list, right, I know what my clear goals are, I know what I'm doing now, I know what I'm doing next, I can stay in flow and move from one item to the next. I don't have to lose focus. So I'm going to talk a little about to-do lists because I think they're really important, and I think you have to figure out, just in terms of big picture to-do list, how many items you can do in a day at your very best. For me, it's 8. So my to-do list is always 8 items. And I think one of the reasons knowing that number is so important is it allows you to know what a win is. It allows you to know when you can turn off your brain and say, okay, I've done a good job today. I can now relax. I've deserved it, right? And I think that metric is really, really useful. When I move between tasks, instead of checking social media or looking at Facebook or pulling my attention out, that's either when I'm going to deploy a little exercise, right? Do a set of 50 push-ups or something just to like break my brain up and clear my head and allow me to move into the next phase. I'll do 5 minutes of yoga, or one of the things I really like to do is 3 rounds of box breathing. I'll do like 7-second sides, and I'll just do 3 rounds of box breathing followed by like a minute of breath of fire. And I like the box breathing and breath of fire because it'll allow me to reset, right? To sort of like put the old task away and move towards the new, but it won't alter my brainwave state. And it won't, I mean, the problem with social media, the problem with all that stuff is it's hijacking your emotions, right? It's going to take you out of that kind of alpha, beta, alpha, theta borderline state where you need to be. Flow is amazing because it's this peak state where we're performing at our best. We get to be creative in 360 degrees. Any direction you turn, you can start making interesting decisions. And because performance is max, right, you're going to be at your best at that moment. What the paradox of control is that kind of played out. It's 360 degrees worth of creative expression in almost any direction. Any direction we go, we can be really, really good, even though we're at the edge of our abilities, right? Even though we're being stretched to the utmost, we have this almost godlike superpower, right? That we can control the outcomes. If we're processing from about 400 billion bits of information a second, subconsciously, and conscious mind is about 2,000 outputs, and that's kind of the number that most people work with right now. It appears that conscious thought moves at about 100 to 150 miles an hour, which is pretty fast. Subconscious thought, on the other hand, can move up to 100,000 miles an hour. Really, really, really fast. And flow appears to be one of the only times we actually get to be conscious of the subconscious mind, right? Like we can actually see it working. One of the things that we know is that humans, actually all mammals, have a very difficult time feeling curiosity and anxiety at the same time. They're sort of opposite ends of the same spectrum, both underpinned by the same neurochemical. Norepinephrine is the same same chemical. So it's very easy, first of all, to reframe things that you're anxious about into things that you're curious about. But by stacking curiosities, right, by stacking things that you're curious about, you're actually lowering fear as well. So fear is obviously going to block performance, going to block motivation. Fear is really, really destructive on our system over the long haul. So by stacking curiosities atop one another, you are getting to a place where you're actually cooking with real fire from a motivation perspective. You're also dampening down fear, so there's bonuses. When you found a place that 3 or 4 of your passions really intersect, the next thing you want to do is play there, right? You want to educate yourself as much as you can. I like to do this in small, bite-sized chunks, 20 minutes a day, a half hour a day, read 30 pages in a book on the topic, read a couple magazine articles, watch a lecture or two, and I like going, hey Terry, I like going a little bit at a time, because by going a little bit at a time, you are once again creating more conditions for pattern recognition. Every day you're feeding this a little bit, giving, not overloading the brain, just giving your brain enough to start making more connections. More connections means more dopamine. More dopamine is going to drive focus, it's going to drive flow, so it's going to reinforce all of this. I don't think there are any real stupid people in the world. I just think there are people who speak different languages. And if you can figure out the language, if you can learn the language, you can talk to anybody and you can learn anything. And so one of the reasons I'm emphasizing little learning at a time is you're really just trying to teach yourself the language of the subject, right? Most expertise is about learning the language of the subject. Once you've got that down, you've got a scaffolding you can build from, and most importantly, you can start asking experts questions. If you're going to have a career out of words, you can never have too many arrows in your quiver. And he meant a couple of things. The first thing he meant is that if you're going to be a novelist, for example, don't just know how to write your style. Just don't know how to write one style of sentences. Don't know how to communicate in one way. Learn how to communicate in every possible way, right? Investigate and interrogate novel writing and get all those arrows in your quiver. At a larger picture, because he's had a whole career out of words and he understands what it takes. He understands all the stops along the way. What he meant is know how to write everything. Know how to be a poet and a novelist and a staff writer and a science writer and a corporate social responsibility report writer and a co-author and a social media writer and an online marketer, and understand everything. One of the things we know about flow is it can only show up when we get our self out of the way, right? The prefrontal cortex turns out, our sense of self disappears. If your ego is all fired up, you're all up in yourself, right? It's really hard to get rid of the self because you're all occupying that space. Mind-altering substances are really, really good for us, right? We don't say it out loud. We don't say it that way. We couch it a lot of different ways. But that does seem to be the truth that a lot of people are telling out loud. And it's showing up in business, it's showing up in society. And I just think we should put a name to it. There are lots of different ways to steer the system. The Bannister effect, which I wrote about in Rise of Superman. The Bannister effect, for those of you who don't know the story, the quick version is when Roger Bannister ran the first 4-minute mile, sub 4-minute mile, it was a big deal. It took forever, right? Like 70 years of mile times. We dropped like a quarter of a second every 10 years. And it takes forever, right? And we get there and Bannister does it. And then a month later, somebody else breaks his record. And a couple months after that, it's somebody else. And 5 years later, it's a teenager. And right. So the question is, what the hell changed, right? The challenge, the physical challenge, running a sub 4 mile, still the same, right? What changed is the mental frame we built around the challenge. What started out, what we thought used to be impossible, is now possible. And as a result, it starts to become possible. So when you see athletes do this, when they look at a feat and they're like, well, it's impossible, I don't know, then that once they believe it's possible, their brain will start pulling in the information they need to know to make that possible. There's a Silicon Valley saying that you are the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I think it's very, very true. And I think one of the reasons it's really, really true is, first of all, the 5 people we spend the most time with, they sort of set the barrier for what we think is possible and impossible, right? They are sort of like the limits on the Bannister effect in our world, right? So we can sort of see possibilities for ourselves that are only as big as the kind of the 5 people we're surrounded with. I think that's part of it. I think the other thing is that the 5 people we're surrounded with are the people that keep your values in check, right? They're there because they share your values. You're steering by them. And when you violate your values, right, the 5 people who are around you, those are the people who say, hey man, you're fucking up. Don't do that, right?